Chapter 1. The game before the first town. First of all, you will find here the options that have been played. There are quite a few of them, but they have been played to allow explanations of the rules in general to be introduced as we go along. Of course, we'll be playing the African, American, and Scandinavian map rules, as you can see here, the divisions option, which is very useful for the first loss in a combat result. Artillery, which is very useful, for example, for the French and their defense against the Wehrmacht in particular. We'll be playing with the units present in Plane in Flames and Ships in Flames, which are very interesting modules. And we'll be applying the HQ support and supply, which are a real help in combat ratios, for example. Supply units, which we'll be using at the start of the game in Ethiopia, but which will also be useful in Asia, with shortening of supply lines. Task force markers, saving of oil ponds and construction ponds, the rules for carrier planes, units, pilots, offensive points, Italian frogmen, wild banner armies, Siberian territorials, heavy weapon units, which we'll find mainly in pattern in France at the head of the game, and wars. When each of these options is played, I'll explain the rules and why we are using this particular rule, as each is already a request from one or two of the 4 players. It's worth noting that we won't be using Jerry limits, so if the German wants to build only armored units in the first turn, and several units in the next, you can do so.
Here you will find the final placement of the military units of each major power with a brief description of the strategies displayed by the 4 players. The American player, Frederick, will play the USA as well as France. All the American forces are placed to the east towards the Pacific. The USA will not be moving much over the next 4 years, so its initial positioning is not essential. On the other hand, France choose to position itself along the Maginot Line, with a few units facing Belgium to prevent any German initiatives. He told us that he often had friction with the communist player and had already undertaken not to provide him with many Lend-Lease units. Things got out of hand and the European Axis player burst out laughing. A carnivorous laugh, in my opinion. We have Enrico, playing the fascist states of Europe, namely Italy and Germany. First of all, days of decision allows for the possibility of a fracture between these 2 countries depending on the political options played. But in 1936, the European Axis was in the making and both countries will be played by Eric. Germany is showing its determination to reoccupy the Rhine, has already placed troops in front of Alsace-Lorraine, and does not seem to be concerned about its other neighbors, notably Poland. Italy has massed troops in Ethiopia, where it is at war with the forces of that poor independent country, and its forces in Italy seems intent on moving towards the French border. The other Axis player has taken charge of Japan, which has massed its force in front of the still inviolate borders of nationalist China. She seems ready to send its forces from Japan toward its future enemy, as its border with the USSR does not seem to be very densely populated at the moment. The next player has taken over the management of the Commonwealth and nationalist China. The English are ready for any eventuality and have already indicated that they will first and foremost strengthen their empire before supporting their future allies. In nationalist China, a thin defense in front of Japanese Manchuria, but few units on the Chinese coast. This player also indicated that he was more wary of Mao Chinese than of the Mikado. Quite a program. The last player will deal with the communist states, the USSR and communist China. By his own admissions, he doesn't much like playing with the American player and told us that it was up to the Commonwealth to help him if he needed it. But when he heard that his player, as a nationality Chinese, was more suspicious of Mao than Tojo, he told me that he would be quite lonely in this game. Mao and his attached unit were placed in and around Xi'an, while the Soviets opened up their position in Europe by abandoning an aggressive policy towards Finland, but more markedly towards Romania. Nothing against Persia, and not very aggressive against the Japanese. Also, Vladivostok was garrisoned. As soon as a major power changes ideology, its country is played by the player who runs the political system that this major power joins. Let me explain. If French change, for example, from a democratic political system to a fascist political state, then the player who was in charge of the USA and France will see France played either by the Japanese player or by the Italian and German player. France being an European state, it would be more logical to be played by the European axis, but having the Japanese player put a foot in European politics by managing fascist France would not be lacking in piquancy. The same applies, for example, to nationalist China. If it becomes communist, it will no longer be played by the player who controlled the Commonwealth and nationalist China. This country will then be played by the communist player who controlled the USSR and communist China.
Let's read. The needle tears the hole